A woman steps off a train in the middle of a windy and sandy wilderness, carrying a promise letter and a dream of a new beginning. But in just a moment, she realizes she has gotten off at the wrong station, where no one knows her name. No one is waiting for her. In a strange land, there is only the sound of the wind and the curious eyes of strangers. And then, a little girl runs up, hugs her, and cries out, "Mama, if it were you, what would you do? Would you flee to save your honor, or stay and see if fate had something to say? Could a mistake be a gift from God, or the final test of her life? Imagine if a lost moment led you back to where your heart belongs. Would you have the courage to stop and listen? I invite you to join the story of Evelyn, a woman lost in the West, and her magical journey of love, faith, and rebirth. If you believe that sometimes a wrong turn can lead us home, please like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts to start that journey with me. The wind blew down from the northern mountains, carrying with it the chill of old snow. Late afternoon covered the town of Red Willow in a silvery gray, the small wooden roof shivering in the wind. The oil lamp post in front of the railway station swayed, the metal clanging like a lonely bell in the wilderness. The Cheyenne freight and passenger train stopped for about 10 minutes. As the wheels screeched to a halt, a woman stepped off, her long skirt touching the ground, clutching a worn suitcase. She was in her early 30s, slim, and her wide-brimmed hat hid most of her face, revealing only pale gray eyes, deep, sad, but bright. Her name was Evelyn Grace Whitmore. In her hand, she held a letter, yellowed and worn, from repeated reading. In it, a man named Charles Holbrook of Montana Territory wrote that he was looking for a wife, a kind, homekeeping, and child-loving woman. He said he would send a horse to meet her at Holbrook Junction, but Evelyn was standing in front of a wooden sign that read Red Willow Creek. She frowned. She didn't remember this place on the map, but when she turned around, the train was already moving. Steam filled the air. The whistle blew, then disappeared into the thick fog. The train has left. She is lost here. A thin station master, his nose red with cold, came out. "You've come to the wrong station, ma'am," he said hoarsely. "The next train isn't until tomorrow morning. It's going to snow." Evelyn nodded slightly. "Is there an inn around here?" "There's only the Dusty Mule, but I advise you, a woman alone, not to stay there." He glanced at the wind, then added, "Maybe go to the post office. They sometimes shelter travelers for the night." She thanked him, pulled her suitcase, and walked down the dirt road into town. The road was deserted, save for the wind and creaking doors in the late afternoon. The lights in a few houses cast a warm yellow glow, but everything else was still cold. When she arrived at the Red Willow post office, the door was ajar. A small girl of about 7 was standing on a wooden stool, trying to reach the mailbox. Her blonde hair was tousled, her cheeks rosy from the wind. Evelyn stepped forward and said softly, "What are you doing?" The girl, startled, turned around. In her hand was a small envelope tied with twine. I'm sending a letter to my mother," she said, her voice trembling with cold. "She's in heaven, but I thought if I sent the letter, God would read it." Evelyn was silent. A soft feeling ran through her heart. She knelt down to the girl's level and helped place the letter in the chest slot. "Your mother will read it," she said, smiling slightly. The little girl looked at her for a long time, her blue eyes shining in the light. Then suddenly, she walked up, opened her arms, and hugged Evelyn, sobbing. Mama Evelyn was stunned. The wind outside seemed to have stopped. The door to the station opened, and a man entered. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark leather jacket and a woolen scarf. His face was tanned, the stern features of a man who had seen war. He looked at the scene before him. His daughter was hugging a stranger, and the stranger seemed to be from another world. "Lydia," he called softly, his voice low and husky like palm wood. "What are you doing?" The little girl raised her head, tears in her eyes. "Dad, I told you. Mom is back." Evelyn bent down and gently removed the child's hand. "You're mistaken, dear. I'm just a lost cause." The man looked at her, his eyes cold, but not malicious. "I am Caleb Turner. This is my daughter, Lydia. Sorry about her. Daydreaming. Come in. It's going to snow." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't want to bother." Caleb looked at the darkening sky. "No one should be out at night like this, unless you want to freeze before the train comes in tomorrow morning." His voice was not gentle, but there was a firmness in it that made it impossible for her to refuse. Evelyn nodded slightly. "In that case, I would like to stay for the night." "Thank you," he simply said. "Let's go." On the way home, Lydia held her hand the whole time, chirping, "Do you like apple pie? I have some left at home, and I have a cat named Buttons." Evelyn laughed, her first laugh since leaving St. Louis. The sky darkened, and the first snowflakes fell. The dirt road turned to a white blur. Turner Farm sat on the edge of town, beside a frozen stream. Smoke rose from its tall chimney. The wooden door opened, and the warmth from inside poured out like a welcoming embrace. In the main room, a fire burned in the fireplace. On the table was an old photograph of a young woman, her face kind. Evelyn paused, sensing the absence that hung over the house. Caleb noticed her gaze. "That's my wife," he said softly. "She died 3 years ago, in the worst winter I've ever seen." Evelyn said nothing, just nodded slightly. She understood. Loss had its own sound, and she had heard it in her heart, as Lydia fell asleep in the chair. Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered fields, the pale moonlight illuminating the horizon. She gently touched the old suitcase. Inside, Charles Halbrook's proposal was still there, like a string pulling her back on the path she had chosen. But in that moment, she suddenly felt her heart wavering. Perhaps, sometimes people don't get off at the wrong station, but get off at the right one. Just don't understand why she turned to see Caleb sitting silently by the fireplace, a cup of coffee in his hand, his gaze sad. Oh, a small flame lit inside her. Not love exactly, but something warm and strange, like the hope of belonging. Outside, the snow was still falling, each flake as light as a breath. The oil lamp hanging above the door swayed gently in the breeze. When Caleb pushed open the heavy wooden door, warmth and the smell of baking cornflakes filled the air. Evelyn stood for a moment in the doorway, a fragile border between cold and peace. The cabin had only 2 rooms, the main room with its fireplace and large dining table, and a small bedroom where Lydia usually slept. On the walls hung an old saddle, a few black and white photographs, and an old guitar leaned against the corner. Evelyn took off her thick coat, the snow still clinging to her shoulders. She set down her suitcase and said softly, "Your house is so warm." Caleb simply replied, "Fire. Fire is the only thing that lets you know you're alive around here." He bent down to add more firewood. The crackling sound of the wood mingled with the howling wind outside. Lydia ran over and held Evelyn's hand. "I'll sleep in your room," My bed is big. I'll give you my teddy bear." She laughed. "Come on. I'll only stay one night. The train leaves tomorrow morning." But Lydia insisted one night is enough for the bear to have a new friend. Caleb watched the scene, his eyes softening. He poured more coffee, his voice hoarse. "You can rest in Lydia's room, if she's okay with it. I'll lie out here by the fireplace." Evelyn nodded, thanking her. As Lydia removed the blanket, she caught sight of a small painting hanging on the wall, a woman in a white dress, standing in a field of yellow flowers. Beneath the frame was written Margaret Turner, 1853-1888. She suddenly understood. This was Caleb's ex-wife. A warm and painful feeling ran through her heart, pity for the man and for herself. They were both survivors of loss. Night fell. Outside, the snow was falling heavily, covering the eaves. The wind blew through the cracks in the door like someone sighing. Evelyn spread out her woolen blanket, the yellow light casting a soft shadow on her face. Lydia was fast asleep, hugging her teddy bear, a small smile on her lips. She sat up and looked out the small window. The dim moonlight fell on the vast white fields. There was no one, no sound of a train, just the vastness of nature and the silence that made her heart beat faster. She thought back to her days in St. Louis, the sound of the piano in the small classroom, the laughter of her students, and the look in the eyes of her husband, who had died young. It was all a distant memory now. She sighed softly, afraid to wake Lydia. There was a soft knock on the door. "Are you awake?" Caleb's voice was soft. Evelyn opened the door, and there he was, holding a cup of warm milk. "Lydia usually drinks this before bed. I thought you might need it too." She took it, smiling softly. "Thank you." The light from the fireplace illuminated Caleb's face. The small wrinkles at the corners of his eyes looked gentler in the golden light. "Do you usually live like this?" she asked. "Yes. Me and Lydia. Sometimes Silas Boone, the groom, comes over, but mostly it's just the two of us." He paused, his voice low. "People think I choose to be alone. Actually, I just haven't found a reason to say there's more than one person in the house." Evelyn was silent. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "it is not because one is lonely. It is because one is afraid that if one speaks, the memories will return." Caleb looked up at her. His eyes softened for a moment. "You understand that very well," she replied, her voice as soft as a breath. There was a silence between the two of them, but it wasn't heavy, just the kind of silence that two wounded souls recognized in each other as if, without words, they understood. After that, Caleb went to rest. Evelyn sat watching the fire. Each crackle was like the heartbeat of this house. Steady, steady. The next morning, the first light shone through the frosted glass. Snow lay thickly on the steps. Evelyn looked out, but saw no one. A sparrow perched on the wooden fence, shivered, and flew away. She went out into the kitchen and found Caleb making breakfast eggs, bacon, and cornbread. He poured strong black coffee and said without looking up, "The train was delayed this morning. Snow blocked the tracks. It could be a few days." She looked surprised, then smiled sadly. "Looks like I've caused more trouble." "No trouble," he said calmly. "There's plenty of room for kindness in this house." That sentence made her pause. Simple, but enough to warm her heart in the cold morning of -10 degrees. Lydia woke up, her hair a mess, and ran to hug her. "Auntie, it's a beautiful snow day. Shall we make a snowman?" Evelyn laughed and nodded. "If Daddy lets me." Caleb looked out the window, the snow still falling. He hesitated, then nodded. "Just stay away from the fence." Laughter echoed through the yard all morning. Lydia built a snowman. Evelyn put on her old straw hat. Caleb watched them from the porch, the strange woman in the blue dress against the snow, and his daughter laughing for the first time in months. Something inside him began to melt. Not love exactly, but the belief that maybe this winter wouldn't be as long as the years before. As dusk fell, the three of them sat at the dining table. Lydia chattered away. Caleb listened quietly, occasionally smiling. Evelyn saw something different in his eyes, still quiet, but warmer, like a small fire rekindled after a long period of cold. Night came. The wind still blew outside. The snow fell lighter. Inside, the firelight from the fireplace illuminated the photograph of his dead wife. But this time, the light was no longer sad, but gentle, as if the past had been caressed by the warmth of the present. Evelyn wrote in the small notebook she carried with her, "Sometimes I feel like a stranger in a faraway land. But then, in a small wooden house, amidst the sound of wind and the smell of wood smoke, I realize there are places that don't need to be found, because they will find me." She put down her pen and smiled slightly. On the other side of the wall, Lydia was asleep, breathing evenly. In the outer room, Caleb was still awake. He sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames, a piece he thought he had forgotten. The snow had not melted. 5 days had passed since the morning Caleb had welcomed Evelyn into the house. The roads leading out of Red Willow Creek were knee-deep in snow. No trains, no mail, no people, only wind and snow, and the distant call of woodpeckers reminded them that the world still breathed. Evelyn settled into the routine. She rose early in the morning to light the fire, make coffee, and toast cornbread. While Lydia was still huddled in her blanket, Caleb went out to the stables, his shoulders covered with a thin layer of snow. He returned, quietly hung his leather jacket on a hanger, and nodded, saying nothing more. There was an unusual silence between them, not forced, not distant, like two people who had suffered enough loss to understand that. Sometimes, silence was the closest thing to being together. At noon, Evelyn taught Lydia how to read. She used ashes on a slate to write the letters. She read each word aloud, her voice ringing, her eyes shining. "You know, Lydia," Evelyn said, "each word is like a seed. If you read it with your heart, it will grow into a story." Lydia tilted her head. "So you're the one who grows letters?" The question made Evelyn laugh. "Maybe so. And I'm the one who nurtures them with my imagination." Caleb stood on the porch listening, his lips curving up slightly, a rare smile. He looked at the two of them, a picture of emptiness his heart had never dared to dream of. In the afternoon, the snow stopped falling. The three of them went out into the yard. Lydia threw snowballs. Evelyn mended a torn blanket. Caleb sat and whittled the handle of a wooden plow. The peaceful scene made Evelyn feel like she belonged, as if she had always been here, a long time ago. That evening, Lydia opened an old Bible and read aloud, "He will wipe away every tear, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, nor pain any more." She looked up Miss Evelyn. Do you believe that Evelyn was silent? She had believed before she lost her first husband, before the long, lonely nights had made faith a luxury. "I want to believe," she said softly. "Maybe God is still there. Sometimes you just need to be quiet to hear him." Caleb looked up from the corner of the table. "I lost it," he said hoarsely. "When Margaret died, I stopped praying. But this girl," he looked at Lydia, She never stopped. Lydia smiled softly, her eyes shining like two small stars. Because if I stop, who will talk to Mom in heaven? A moment of silence filled the room. Evelyn bowed her head, hiding the tears that had just fallen onto her hands. The next day was a rare clear day. The sunlight reflected off the snow, making everything look silvery. Evelyn opened the door and breathed in the crisp, cold air. The wind carried the scent of pine resin and wood smoke. She thought that in St. Louis, people would be heading to church this morning, and she was lost in this faraway land. But strangely, she did not feel lost. Lydia ran over and pulled her hand. "Auntie, Dad is fixing the fence. Come and see." Evelyn stepped out in a sweater. Caleb was hammering in new stakes, his sleeves rolled up, veins standing out. The sunlight caught the melting snow in his dark hair. "Do you want to help?" he asked without looking up. "No help. But I can hold a nail." He chuckled. "Holding a nail is good too." They worked side by side, not saying much. There was only the sound of hammers, cracking wood, and Lydia chasing the puppy around the yard. In that moment, Evelyn suddenly felt a strange peace in her heart. This man did not speak flowery words, did not promise, only silently worked. But in that silence, she heard another language, the language of honesty, of someone who had suffered but still knew how to live a decent life. That night, Lydia asked for a bedtime story. Evelyn sat by the bed and told her in a warm voice. Once upon a time, there was a woman who was lost in a white land. She thought she was going the wrong way, but she was actually going where God wanted her to go. There she met two people, a man who had forgotten how to laugh, and a little man who believed that praying could melt the snow. Lydia narrowed her eyes and asked softly, "Will she stay?" Evelyn smiled, stroking her hair. "She doesn't know yet, but she feels. Maybe, if she leaves, it will be a little colder." The door to the room opened slightly. Caleb stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze soft. "That's a good story," he said softly. "Thanks," Evelyn replied. "I'm just telling you what I saw." He opened his mouth to say something, then stopped. The oil lamplight fell on their faces, two souls standing on the thin line between old and new, between fear and faith. The next morning, as Evelyn was washing dishes, Caleb walked up. "I know you're planning on going to Montana, but if the roads are blocked, you can stay longer. Lydia needs someone like you." Evelyn turned back. "Thank you, but I don't want to cause any more gossip." Caleb frowned. "No one here cares who comes and goes where. We're used to being alone." She smiled sadly. "You are wrong. Where there are people, there are rumors." He was silent. Her words were like a gentle breeze blowing through the kitchen wall, touching the empty spaces he tried to forget. That afternoon, Lydia brought Evelyn a small gift, a hemp bracelet with a heart-shaped wooden button. "I made it for you. If you go, take it with you, to remember that someone in Red Willow is thinking of you." Evelyn bent down and hugged her. "Thank you, Lydia. I will keep it as a prayer." Night. It was snowing again. Evelyn sat by the window, writing in her little notebook. "There are days when I feel stuck, but it turns out that God holds me back to see clearly my heart. I don't know if I will stay or go tomorrow, but I know this place has begun to take shape of what I call home." She put down her pen and looked into the living room. Caleb was sitting there fixing the strings of his guitar. Lydia was asleep with her head on her father's lap. The guitar played softly, a simple melody, sad and heartbreakingly beautiful. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened. Outside, the snow was still falling, but inside the cabin, something had begun to bloom, like a green bud in winter, small but resilient. The snow began to melt. After nearly 2 weeks of isolation, Red Willow Creek slowly returned to its humble routine. The main road was exposed, muddy and glistening with the light of thaw. The sound of horse-drawn carts echoed in the distance, and the smell of leather and coal smoke wafted on the wind. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the snow melt in thin streams down the roof. The late winter sun caught her hair, making it a pale gold. She heard Lydia call from the kitchen, "Miss Evelyn, would you like some cornbread? I made it." She laughed and walked in. There was a burnt cake on the table, but Lydia was so proud her blue eyes sparkled. "Best in the world," Evelyn said, despite the burning smell. Caleb, sharpening a small knife, looked up at the two of them. He said nothing, just smiled a rare smile that lit up the house. But while there was laughter inside their house, outside, the first whispers began to spread. That morning, Evelyn went to town to buy some necessities: salt, flour, and a few yards of fabric to sew blankets. She wore a blue robe, a woolen cap, and a bamboo basket. As she entered Martha Calloway's grocery store, the doorbell rang softly. Martha, a plump widow of 50, her hair tied back in a bun, was standing behind the counter. She looked up, a polite smile on her lips, but her eyes were as cold as the wind. "Ah, the Turner stranger," she said slowly. "I hear you've been there for half a month," Evelyn replied calmly. "Yes, the snow blocked the road." "I suppose so, but people have plenty to talk about." Martha bent over the parcel, her voice drawling. A city widow coming to live with a country widow. It must be interesting. The words were as light as the wind, but there were sharp thorns hidden behind them. Evelyn's expression did not change. "I'm just staying here temporarily. When the road is clear, I'll leave." "Yes." Martha squinted. "I hope so. Little Red Willow can't stand too much whispering." She paid, bowed slightly, and left. Outside, the wind whipped, sending the melted snow flying up and soaking her skirt. Evelyn clutched her basket tightly, her heart colder than the wind. She had lived long enough to know that rumors were like snow. They started as small flakes, but if they fell long enough, they could bury a person. That evening, when Caleb returned, he noticed that she was unusually quiet. He hung up his coat and asked, "What happened?" She just shook her head, smiling faintly. "Nothing. It's just, people talk a lot in town." Caleb understood. His eyes darkened. His jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "Things that don't matter." He approached, his voice low. "Evelyn, in this region, people live by honor. They may be poor, but they can't stand it when someone thinks badly of them. I don't want you to get hurt here." She looked up and looked straight at him. "Do you think I am that weak? I have been through war, lost my family, my home, my future. The words of a few people will not break me." Caleb was silent. He saw in those eyes not just strength, but a deep sadness, the sadness of someone who had suffered so much and still chose to be gentle. "Sorry," he said softly. "I was just afraid Lydia might hear something, and—" Evelyn interrupted with a small smile. "She knows love. She won't listen to cruel things. Children can see more clearly than adults sometimes." 2 days later, Lydia was invited to church to practice singing for Sunday service. Evelyn went along, both to help Pastor Simon Blake and to entertain Lydia. The little church stood among the pine hills, Its wooden walls faded, its bell tower tilted slightly. The organ sounded faintly, but the sound reminded Evelyn of St. Louis of the classroom, of the organ she had left behind. She entered and helped the children arrange chairs, but the atmosphere was different. A few women whispered as she passed. A young girl, the blacksmith's wife, glanced at her and looked away. She still smiled, keeping her composure, but in her heart, each whisper was like a small knife wound. After practice, Reverend Blake approached, his voice warm. "Don't let their words upset you. Evelyn, I know them and I know you. They only fear what they don't understand." She nodded slightly. "Thank you, Father. I think maybe I should go out less to avoid trouble." "No," said the minister, his eyes bright and kind. "You must go out, for light can only dispel darkness if it dares to remain in the midst of it." Evelyn smiled. The remark made her feel better. But as she left the church, she heard whispers behind her. She must be planning to take over Turner Farm. Widows. Who would believe it? The cold wind cut through her skin. But what made her shiver was the loneliness of the gaze behind her. That night, Lydia slept soundly, while Evelyn sat at the table writing. They say the west wind carries dust and rumors. Perhaps so. But I believe the truth has wings too. It just flies a little slower. She closed the book, hearing footsteps. Caleb came out, holding a cup of black coffee. "I'm sad today." "No," she said softly. "It's just that sometimes silence isn't enough for others to understand you." Caleb looked at her for a long time. "Evelyn, you can tell me anything. I know you're not what they say." She looked into his eyes and saw a quiet trust. "Thank you. But I don't need anyone to defend me. I just want to be true to myself." He nodded slightly, then said slowly, "Your silence makes me think of Margaret. She was like that too. No complaints, no blame. I used to think silence was weakness, but now I see maybe it's strength." Evelyn smiled, her voice as light as the wind. "Sometimes we don't need to shout to be heard. We just need to stand still so they can see." The words made the room suddenly warm. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving only the full moon to illuminate the roof. In its light, the silence between them was no longer unfamiliar. It was the only thing that truly existed. A few days later, Lydia brought home a small flower from church. "They said you shouldn't be here," she said sadly. "But I told you. God brought you." Evelyn knelt down and hugged her. "Thank you. Sometimes people are afraid of good things because they have never seen them." Caleb stood in the doorway, listening to the whole sentence. He knew, even in silence, that this woman was fighting not with words, but with determination. And in that moment, he realized he no longer just wanted to protect her, but also wanted to believe in her. The wind was strong from the south, carrying moisture and the smell of smoke mixed with the melting snow. March in Red Willow Creek was fickle like that bright sunshine during the day. Stormy nights. The sky was overcast today, the clouds thick as an old blanket covering the mountains. Caleb said it was a sign of the dry wind, the kind that would light a fire more easily than any lamp. Evelyn and Lydia spent the rest of the day in the kitchen. They baked apple pies, hung laundry near the fireplace, and laughed endlessly. Caleb returned from the fields, his face haggard, sweat beading on the collar of his coat. He said some hay bales had fallen over and needed to be gathered before dark. Evelyn wanted to help, but he shook his head. "That's my job. You two stay inside. It's going to get windy." As dusk fell, The wind was so strong that the wooden door rattled. Evelyn locked the latch and listened to the howling wind on the roof. Lydia sat on her lap, hugging the book, whispering, "Auntie, I'm scared of the wind. It sounds like someone is calling my name." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder gently. "It's just an echo. Dear, the wind likes to tease people in this part of the world." Caleb returned late in the evening. He shook the snow off his coat and set the oil lamp on the table. "It's strange. I smell smoke." He opened the window, smelled something burning, and ran outside. Evelyn put Lydia back in her chair and followed. The sky was dark, the wind was howling, and a streak of orange light was coming from the stables at the end of the yard. What started as a small fire quickly turned into a raging fire. Caleb shouted, "The stable," and rushed off. Evelyn grabbed Lydia's hand. "Stay inside and lock the door. Don't go out." "Okay," she cried. "Don't go." Evelyn stroked her cheek. "I have to help your father. Stay here." "Lydia?" She ran after Caleb. Snow caught in her skirts, the wind whipping smoke into her face. Caleb was trying to open the stable door, where 2 horses were thrashing in panic. Fire was burning the straw, black smoke billowing. Evelyn didn't have time to think. She grabbed the wet blanket hanging outside the manger, pulled it over her head, and rushed in with him. The horses' neighs echoed through the smoke. Caleb coughed as he opened the door, shouting, "Get them out." Evelyn held the reins and tried to lead the horse away from the flames, her body shivering from the heat. When the animal was finally free, she staggered, coughing, and fell to the snow. Caleb ran to her, pulling her away. "Are you okay?" Evelyn gasped, her eyes wet with smoke. "No, I'm fine." "What about Lydia?" "She's in the house. I locked the door." He looked back at the stable, where the flames were still high. "There's nothing left to save," he said, his voice heavy. Evelyn looked at him, saw sweat and smoke on his haggard face, his eyes shining with pain and helplessness. She put a hand on his shoulder. "At least we're alive, and so are the horses." Caleb nodded, but his hands were clenched. "The kids in town will be starving for hay next month. That stable isn't just for me." They both watched in silence as the flames consumed the barn. The night sky turned blood red. The wind was still howling, but Lydia shouted, "Father, Aunt Evelyn." They both turned around in surprise. The girl was not in the house. Lydia was running towards them, barefoot in the snow, holding a kitten. Evelyn rushed forward and knelt down to catch her. "What are you doing? I told you to stay in the house. I heard the explosion and thought something was wrong with you." The girl sobbed and trembled in her arms. Evelyn hugged her tightly. "It's okay. I'm here." Caleb knelt beside her, his voice shaking. "Don't ever run into a fire again. Lydia, do you understand never?" She nodded, tears streaming down her wind-blown cheeks. Evelyn turned back and said softly, "I'm sorry. I should have kept a closer eye on her." Caleb shook his head. "No, I should be the one apologizing. If I hadn't left the lamp in the stable—" He paused, bowing his head. "Maybe I was careless." After a while, the fire died down, leaving only ashes and smoke. They took Lydia home. She sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. Evelyn applied a warm compress, her voice gentle. "You were very brave, but promise me, next time let the adults do the dangerous work." "Okay." Lydia nodded slightly, looking up at her with red eyes. "I prayed in the fire. I said, 'God, please don't take them any more.' And you heard." Evelyn choked. She smoothed back her tangled blonde hair and whispered, "Yes, you heard." That night, Caleb sat alone in front of the fireplace, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. Evelyn came over and brought him a cup of tea. They were silent for a long time. Only the sound of firewood crackling could be heard. Then Caleb said softly, "Today, when I saw you in the fire, I thought I had lost another person." Evelyn looked up, the firelight reflecting off her face. "You didn't lose anyone, Caleb. Sometimes God takes things to keep the soul. The stable is gone, but Lydia and you are still here, and that's a blessing." He looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "I don't know why you went to the wrong station, Evelyn, but maybe there's nothing wrong with that." She smiled, her eyes moist. "I'm starting to think so too." The wind outside had calmed. On the roof, the ice melted into small drops that fell steadily, like the quiet flow of time. Lydia slept soundly, her face peaceful. Evelyn looked at the child, filled with a sweet and strange feeling, a feeling she thought she had lost with her husband. Caleb stood up, put on his coat, opened the door, and looked out into the yard. It was dark, except for the damp ashes and the lingering smell of smoke. "Maybe tomorrow," he said softly, "we can start again. I'll rebuild the barn. You can help me if you want." Evelyn looked on, her eyes gentle. "I will help. I still owe this place a little peace." As the door closed, she looked at the fireplace. The fire was still burning, but not as fiercely as in the yard. The fire was warm now, gentle and bright, like the emotions inside her, scared, grateful, and vaguely moved. Evelyn opened the little notebook and wrote, "Tonight the fire took away our stable, but it gave me something else in return, the feeling that there are people worth fearing to lose, and that is when you know you are truly alive." She put down her pen, smiled slightly, and looked over at Lydia, who was sleeping, and Caleb, who was quietly checking the windows one last time. Outside, it was dark, but inside the cabin, there was still light, a small one, but enough to believe in tomorrow. 3 days after the fire, the snow stopped falling. The sky over Red Willow was strangely blue, high and still, as if there had never been smoke or fire. The ground was streaked with black ash mixed with melted snow, and a faint smell of burning still hung in the air. But the landscape had a strange purity. It was as if, after the fire had burned away everything old, the place breathed the warmth of a new beginning. Evelyn opened the window and took a deep breath of cool air. The water dripped from the eaves into the gutters, like time returning after a storm. Outside, Caleb was closing the gate, his posture still rigid, but his steps lighter. Lydia ran around, picking up the remains of burnt wood. She smiled every time she saw Buttons, the cat, follow her footprints in the thin snow. In the kitchen, Evelyn prepared breakfast. She toasted corn and roasted coffee, the aroma filling the small house. When Caleb entered, the smell of smoke mixed with the cold wind, making the space feel cozy. He took off his jacket and hung it on a wooden hook. "I heard sparrows for the first time in weeks," he said calmly. "Maybe spring will come early." Evelyn smiled. "After what we've been through, I think every spring is precious." Caleb looked at her, his eyes lingering on her face flushed by the firelight. "Are you hurt anywhere?" "No," she replied, still twirling the wooden spoon in the pot. "Just a little sore shoulder, but nothing major." He nodded, was silent for a few seconds, then said slowly, "I owe you a thank you. Without you, I would have lost Lydia and myself." She turned slightly, her eyes soft and deep. "No one owes anyone anything. Caleb, We only do what humans do when faced with a choice between fear and love. The words left him silent for a long time. He looked at the fire in the fireplace, then at his hands. The charred marks were still there. "I've lived with fear for the past 3 years," he said, his voice low. "Fear of losing someone else, fear of trusting the wrong person, fear of hoping. But that night, when I saw you in the fire, I realized fear doesn't save anyone. It only keeps me in the dark." Evelyn didn't reply. She just put her hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently, a wordless gesture, but enough to say she understood. Sometimes, people don't need to heal each other with words. Just be there, together, in silence. In the afternoon, Lydia asked to go to the field to watch her father put up the new fence. Evelyn came with her, carrying a basket of cookies and hot coffee. The three of them sat under the old pine tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, reflecting off the snow in sparkling shards. Dad said after the fence is finished, "We're going to build a new barn," Lydia said excitedly. "I want to help paint the walls. Will you stay until then?" Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know. Lydia, when the lines open again, I might have to go." She bowed her head, her voice low. "But I don't want you to go." Caleb put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Grown-ups have things to do, honey. Sometimes they don't get to choose like you do." Lydia looked at him, then turned to Evelyn, her eyes brimming with tears. "If God sent her, why let her go?" No one said anything more. There was only the sound of the wind blowing through the grassy hills. Evelyn looked into the distance, where the snow-capped mountains reflected the sunlight, her heart suddenly heavy as if carrying an unnamed burden. Late in the afternoon, Evelyn went to the post office. She wanted to mail a letter to Montana, a letter to end a planned mail-order marriage. The small building stood alone on the dirt road, its roof rusted with rust. She walked in, the warmth of the fireplace and the smell of old paper comforting her. The station master, Mr. Grayson, looked up and recognized her. "Miss Whitmore, it's been a while since you sent anything. Who are you sending it to?" "For Mr. Charles Halbrook of Montana Territory," she replied, handing over the small letter. He nodded and stamped it. "We'll leave tomorrow morning, if the train comes." Evelyn stood still, looking at the red seal on the envelope, like a cut closing the old life. In the letter, she wrote briefly, "Mr. Halbrook, please do not wait for me. Some journeys do not follow the tracks we choose. I have found a place where my soul can rest. Peace to you." She left the post office, feeling both relieved and nervous. The snow melted and flowed under her feet, reflecting her in a hazy, otherworldly light, a woman learning to walk without looking back. On the way back, she saw a strange man on horseback stop at the gate of Turner Farm. He was wearing a black cloak, his hood pulled low, half covering his face. He was talking to Caleb, something urgent. Evelyn approached, catching the last few words. "I'm looking for someone named Evelyn Grace Whitmore. Someone said she was here." She paused. The man turned, his eyes light brown, his smile flat. "Ah, that's fortunate. You're Evelyn. Right, I'm Jasper Reed. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Halbrook." Caleb looked over, his eyes wary. Evelyn asked calmly, "Where is Mr. Halbrook?" "He sent me to get you. Said he was sick, but wanted to keep his word." His voice was smooth, but something about it made Caleb squeeze her hand. "He sent me a letter," Evelyn replied calmly. "I replied today, saying I wouldn't be coming." Jasper shrugged. "Oh, that's a shame. but I'm sure Mr. Holbrook won't give up easily." He gave a half smile, bowed, and rode off, leaving a thin trail of dust in his wake. Caleb watched, his brow furrowed. "I don't like him." "Neither do I," Evelyn replied, her eyes still on the retreating figure. She had a vague feeling that it wasn't over. That night, after Lydia had fallen asleep, Evelyn sat by the window. The snow outside had melted, revealing a damp ground. The moon stretched across the roof, a blinding white. Caleb came out, a cup of hot coffee in his hand. He handed her one and sat down beside her. "He won't come back," he said. "If he does, I won't let him bother you." She looked at him, her eyes warm and worried. "Caleb, I don't want you to get into trouble because of me." "There's no bigger trouble than letting someone important go," he said, his voice low. Evelyn didn't reply. She felt the warmth spread through the space between them. After a moment, she said softly, "I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this place has made me afraid to leave." Caleb turned slightly, a rare smile in his eyes, as quiet as the moonlight shining through the window. "I fear that too, Evelyn, fear that one day the snow will melt too quickly, and you will leave before I have finished saying all I should." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in years, Evelyn did not feel alone in her fear. At least here, someone was trembling with her. The night was quiet. The two sat together until the moon set. In the cabin, silence was no longer a distance, but a shared breath. Outside, the drops of melted snow dripped steadily, like the whisper of time witnessing two hearts finding their rhythm again. Evelyn wrote softly in her notebook before going to sleep. The heart never melts like snow. It only sleeps until touched with sincerity, and when it trembles, it is alive. She closed the book and placed it beside her pillow. In her sleep, she heard someone softly calling her name amidst the warm wind outside the window. 2 days after Jasper Reed's visit, the mood in Red Willow changed again. The sky was overcast, heavy with leaden clouds that threatened something to come. The gossip in town began again. Rumors of Evelyn being a runaway bride spread like wildfire. At the grocery store, Martha Calloway said with conviction that Evelyn had cheated on a wealthy man in Montana, or run away after receiving the dowry. The news spread in a morning, and by afternoon almost everyone had heard at least one version of the same story. Some said Evelyn had a husband who was wanted. Some said she had left a child behind in the East. The more the uncertainty, the more the stories grew. Caleb heard the story from an old friend in town. He threw down the nail he was hammering, his face tense. "Who started it?" he asked hoarsely. "Probably that stranger who came to see her last week." The other replied, "He was talking at the bar last night. You heard she wasn't a good person." Caleb clenched his fists, then abandoned his work, mounted his horse, and galloped home. Evelyn was sitting by the window, teaching Lydia how to read when he arrived. The afternoon light cast a soft glow on her hair. She saw the strain in his eyes and knew what had happened. "What did they say?" she asked, her voice even. Caleb nodded, breathing heavily. He spread his evil all over the place. "Said you ran away from Montana, that you owed money, that you sold yourself." Evelyn interrupted, her voice unwavering, but her eyes drooping slightly. "I knew they would say that." Caleb was silent. "Evelyn, I don't believe a word of it." She smiled faintly. "I know, but believing it or not can't erase the voice out there. Do you know why I really left Montana? He shook his head slightly. Evelyn sighed, her gaze lingering on the distant hills. I never went to Montana. I only agreed to be a mail-order bride because I wanted to start over. But when I got to the next station, I saw my future husband's name on the newspaper list. He had just been arrested for fraud. I panicked, took the wrong train, and got off at the wrong station. It stopped here, Red Willow, and you know the rest. Caleb was silent for a long time. Outside, the wind blew through the pines, making the door creak. Finally, he said slowly, you ran away from something wrong, but now they think you're wrong. Evelyn nodded. It's the same everywhere. It's easier to believe bad things about people than to accept that the truth can be complicated. Lydia raised her head and said in a small voice, Miss Evelyn, are they saying you're a bad person? Evelyn gently stroked her hair. It's okay, honey. Sometimes good people are misunderstood. She bit her lip, looking angry. I'll tell everyone they're wrong. Caleb stopped her. No need. Lydia, we just have to live to prove it. The next afternoon, when Caleb went into town to buy supplies, Evelyn decided to go along. She didn't want to hide. If they kept quiet, the rumors would become real in the eyes of the world. When they entered the grocery store, everyone looked at them. Martha stood behind the counter, a forced smile on her face. Oh, Miss Whitmore, aren't you afraid of meeting people in town today? Evelyn looked straight ahead, her voice calm. I didn't do anything wrong to be afraid of, Mrs. Calloway. I just came here to buy salt and flour, like everyone else. I heard you were going to marry a man in Montana and didn't come, Martha sneered. I must feel sorry for him, Evelyn said slowly. He's a crook. I thank God he let me off at the wrong station. If you feel sorry for anyone, feel sorry for the people he fooled. A few people standing around began to whisper. Martha was about to reply, but Caleb stepped forward, his voice low and firm. That's enough. Martha, you'd better remember what you said in the church next Sunday. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the wind outside. Finally, Martha bowed her head and pretended to rearrange the things on the shelf. Caleb turned to Evelyn. Let's go home. As they walked out, the afternoon sun filtered through the clouds and onto the wet pavement. Evelyn took a deep breath, feeling her shoulders lighten. She hadn't won the crowd, but at least she hadn't bowed her head. That night, Lydia went to bed early. Caleb sat on the porch, watching the shadows stretch across the meadow. Evelyn brought 2 cups of hot tea. They sat together, saying nothing. Frogs croaked in the distance. The smell of damp earth wafted through the air. Caleb spoke first. They can say whatever they want, but I know you. Evelyn, you're stronger than all of them. She chuckled. You make me feel like I've won a battle. No, he said. You're just being true to your truth. And sometimes that's the greatest victory. After a moment, he said softly, when Margaret was alive, she used to say that trust isn't something you give to others, but something you let others build in you. You've done that, Evelyn, with me and with Lydia. Evelyn looked down at her tea, the white smoke rising. Thank you, Caleb, but I'm still scared. Not of them, but of myself, of believing in something that could be lost. Caleb smiled sadly. Everyone is scared like that. But if you don't believe, you're left alone. She looked up at him in the moonlight. Their eyes met, deep and still. Only a second, but it seemed forever. The next morning, Lydia rushed into the room with a beaming face. Miss Evelyn, they say there will be a service at the church to thank the fire for being put out in time. Father said we should all go." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, but then smiled. "Okay, I'll go." The service took place in soft sunlight. People gathered around the churchyard. When Pastor Simon Blake mentioned the brave men and women who fought the fire, he looked directly at Evelyn and Caleb. Sometimes God sends us trials to discover the goodness in our hearts, and sometimes he sends strangers to teach us how to trust again. A silence fell. Martha Calloway bowed her head, embarrassed. Many in the town looked at Evelyn differently, less prejudiced, more thoughtful. Lydia squeezed her hand and said softly, "You see, God is fair." Evelyn smiled. "Yes, dear, he just needs time." When the ceremony ended, Caleb led the horse out. "I don't know what your future holds," he whispered, "but if you stay, Red Willow is where you can start." Evelyn looked up at the blue sky, where the clouds were drifting slowly. Her fear gradually faded, leaving a deep sense of peace. She realized that what was scary was not the past, but not daring to move forward toward the light that awaited. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "People can say whatever they want, but the truth remains still, silent, without need for proof. I am no longer afraid of the wind, for I have learned to stand firm in its midst." She put down her pen and blew out the lamp. Outside, the sound of wind and waves echoed from the distant grasslands, like a whispered promise of this land, where every lost soul could find its way home. 3 days after the Thanksgiving, the sky over Red Willow was a heavy gray. The wind from the west was stinging, the smell of dry earth mixed with field dust. Caleb watched the clouds gather and said to Evelyn, "There's going to be a storm. Not snow, but sandstorms." Evelyn stood on the porch, looking out over the fields, uneasy but not sure why. There was something in the air that sent a chill down her spine, the same vague premonition that preceded the fire. That afternoon, Lydia went to church with the other children to sing, and Evelyn stayed home to tidy up her books. Caleb went outside to check on the newly built stable. The sun was halfway down the hill, the golden light fading. Evelyn was putting her Bible back on the shelf when she heard the sound of hooves in the distance. The sound was unfamiliar, heavy and rapid, like a storm. A figure on horseback stopped just outside the gate. It was Jasper Reed. His black coat was covered in dust, his eyes cold. Evelyn stepped out, her heart pounding. "What are you doing back?" she asked, her voice calm. Jasper smiled faintly. "I forgot to get what I needed." Caleb ran over from afar, holding the horse's reins tightly. "What does he want?" Jasper dismounted and pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "This. An arrest warrant. Evelyn Grace Whitmore is suspected of being an accomplice to Charles Halbrook in a fraud in Montana. I was hired to bring her back." Caleb was stunned. "Nonsense! Halbrook is a wanted man. She is the one who escaped from him." Jasper shrugged. "Whatever people say. I just follow the papers." He glanced at Evelyn, his eyes cold as a knife. "If you leave now, I won't cause any trouble. If not, I will go to the sheriff's office, and this will spread throughout Red Willow." Evelyn stood still. Her hands shook, but her eyes did not waver. "I am innocent. You know that. They paid me to bring you back," Jasper replied. "Right or wrong is irrelevant." Caleb stepped forward, blocking her way. "Get out of here. Reed, I won't let you take her." Jasper laughed, his gaze provocative. "Are you going to hit me? Turner, an ex-soldier turned farmer. Do you know the laws of this territory?" Caleb didn't reply. He only spoke softly. Each word hissed through his teeth. My law is to protect the innocent. The tension in the air was like a broken string. Evelyn touched Caleb's shoulder lightly. No, violence proves nothing. Let me speak. She stepped forward, facing Jasper. I have no money, no honor, nothing to give you. You can take the paper, but I will not follow you. If you need proof, go to Reverend Blake. He knows who I am. Jasper looked at her for a long moment, his faint smile gone. I'll be back, he said coldly, and next time, I won't be alone. He turned his horse and galloped away, kicking up dust. Caleb watched, his fists clenched. Evelyn exhaled, but her heart sank. He'll do it, she whispered. I know, Caleb said, but this time, we're not hiding. As night fell, the sand began to blow. Dust swirled in the air, and the planks creaked. Lydia slept soundly in her room, while Evelyn sat by the window, the oil lamplight illuminating her worried face. Caleb came closer, placing his hand on her shoulder. If he comes back, I'll protect you. But I want you to believe this. You don't have to run anymore. Evelyn looked at him, her voice low but firm. I'm not afraid for myself. Caleb, I'm afraid for Lydia. I don't want her to see any more separations. Caleb sat down next to her. You won't leave, I promise. With me, with Lydia, with Red Willow. We won't let anyone take this peace away. She smiled slightly, her eyes moist. Do you believe in Red Willow that much I believe in people who love? He said, then looked straight at her. I believe in you. The words made Evelyn's heart tremble. She had not heard anyone say that to her in years. It was not a promise, not a love, but a belief, something she thought had died inside her long ago. The next morning, the storm really hit. The sand was thick, and the wind howled around the house like a wild beast. The windows shook, and Lydia, terrified, hid in Evelyn's arms. Caleb put up another board to block the wind, then turned back, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. You keep the girl here? I'll go check the stables. No, Evelyn cried. The wind is too strong. It's dangerous out there. The new stable is weak. If it collapses, the horses will die. I have to go. He pulled the shawl over his head and opened the door, rushing into the sand. Evelyn watched, her heart aching. Lydia clutched her hand. Will he come back? Yes, honey. He's strong. But inside, she was praying. About 10 minutes later, she heard a loud crash. A board had been ripped off the roof and crashed into the yard. Evelyn hugged Lydia and said, Stay in your room, honey, before running out. The sandstorm blurred her vision, but she could see Caleb's silhouette, trying to hold the stable door open, his back arched against the wind. She ran toward it, the wind whipping sand across her face. Caleb, she shouted, but the wind swallowed her voice. He turned just as a wooden post leaned. Evelyn lunged at him, knocking herself out of the way, falling into the mud. Caleb caught her, pulling them both away as the post collapsed. They tumbled to the ground, breathing heavily. The storm was still raging, but for a moment, Evelyn could see his eyes through the haze, warm, steady, and full of emotion. Caleb held her tight, shouting over the wind. You're crazy. Why did you run out here? Evelyn replied. Her voice choked. I can't bear to think you could get hurt. I can't. The words stopped in the wind. Caleb looked at her, then suddenly pulled her into his arms. His kiss was gentle, passionate, brief, but sincere. The wind was still howling outside, but for that moment, it was just the two of them and the warmth of the truth. When the storm subsided, They returned home, soaked with mud, eyes still glued to each other. Lydia ran out to hug them. I was so scared, but I prayed, and God brought you home. Evelyn and Caleb looked at each other, smiling silently. The word parents came out carelessly, but it rang prophetic. That night, as Lydia slept, Evelyn wrote, "The storm brought fear, but it also taught me that there are people worth fearing to lose. And when you are afraid, you know you love." She looked outside. The clouds were clearing, and a faint moonlight filtered through the dust. Caleb sat on the porch, polishing his old guitar. The simple sound of the instrument rang out, a soft thank you between two souls, just saved from the storm. The next morning the sun shone through the windows, casting pale yellow rays on the wooden floor. There was no wind, no dust, only a strange stillness. Red Willow after the storm looked like someone waking from a long sleep, ragged but peaceful. Evelyn woke up early. She stepped out onto the porch, took a deep breath, and smelled the fresh, damp earth on the wind. From a distance, Lydia ran out with her hair in disarray, hugging her tightly. "Auntie." "The sky is clear again. I hear the birds singing again." Evelyn smiled. "Because God heard my prayers." Caleb stepped out next, his shirt rolled up, his hair slightly tousled by the wind. "The stables are still standing," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "A few boards are loose, but we can fix them." Evelyn looked at him, a small smile on her face. "We've been through worse than this." "Haven't we?" Caleb nodded, his eyes warm and deep, like sunlight filtering through storm clouds. That morning, they cleaned up the yard together. Evelyn swept, Lydia picked up broken wood, and Caleb nailed down the fence. No one spoke much, but the air between them was as gentle as a little song each knew by heart. Something new quietly sprouted inside them, like wildflowers after a rain. At noon, they ate on the porch. Evelyn made coffee. Caleb cut the cake. Lydia told the story of the dream she had last night, where the storm turned into a giant horse and carried them flying through the sky. Both adults laughed, and in that moment, they were no longer alone, but a real family. But the peace did not last long. A man on horseback entered the gate. It was the Reverend Simon Blake, his cloak dusty and his face grave. "Caleb, Evelyn," he said slowly, "I have come to report that Jasper Reed was at the sheriff's office this morning." There was a silence. Evelyn felt her throat dry. Reverend Blake continued, "He has a warrant for your arrest, and false evidence that you were involved in the fraud with Halbrook. But I told the sheriff that you have witnesses here, and a community willing to come forward." Caleb clenched his fists. "He wants revenge because we turned him down. I won't let him hurt her." Reverend Blake nodded. "I know, but Red Willow has rules, and we need to prove the truth, not use our fists. The sheriff will be here tomorrow to ask questions. Evelyn, you must be ready to tell everything." Evelyn nodded, looking down at her hands. "I will. I have nothing more to hide." Caleb put his hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. "You will not be alone." That afternoon, Evelyn sat down to write in her notebook. The handwriting trembled slightly. No one can escape the past, but if you keep running, you will never reach where you belong. Perhaps it is time for me to face it, not to prove anything to others, but to free myself. She closed the book and looked up at Lydia playing with buttons. Caleb walked over, holding his old guitar. He sat down next to her and played a few notes. The sound was hoarse but warm. Evelyn asked softly, "What's this called?" He smiled. Margaret used to call it the song of waiting souls. Waiting for what? Waiting until their hearts find their home. She was silent, looking at the rough hands running over the strings. And you, have you found it yet? Caleb looked up, looking at her, his eyes gentle, I think. I'm about to find it. The next day, Red Willow held its breath. The townspeople gathered outside the sheriff's office, a small wooden building with a faded flag. Jasper Reed was there, standing next to a man in uniform. He looked confident, his eyes gleaming with triumph. When Evelyn and Caleb arrived, all eyes were on them. The sheriff began Miss Evelyn Grace Whitmore. You are accused of being an accomplice in the Montana fraud. What do you have to say? Evelyn stepped forward, her voice clear, though a little shaky. I am the one who agreed to marry Mr. Charles Holbrook by letter. Before I left, I knew he was wanted, so I never came to Montana. I got lost and came here, and since then, I have never had any contact with him. I did not take his money. I did not sign any papers. Jasper smirked. You speak well, but I have a letter from Holbrook, with your signature. He held up a crumpled piece of paper. Evelyn looked at it carefully, then replied immediately. That's not my handwriting. The sheriff frowned. Do you have witnesses who confirm you were in Red Willow? During that time, Caleb stepped forward, his voice firm. I met her the day the ship ran aground. Reverend Blake, Lydia, the whole town knows. The minister stepped forward, speaking loudly. She has been teaching the children to read and write since she arrived here. I testify that she lives honestly, and she is a victim, not a sinner. A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff looked at Jasper, then said, If the evidence is false, you will be prosecuted. What do you have to prove? Jasper faltered. I was just following orders. Whose orders? From a man named Holbrook, he replied, his voice trailing off. Everyone gasped. The sheriff nodded. Holbrook was arrested in Billings last week. He said it was Mr. Reed who took the money to cancel the forged marriage certificate. So, it was you who committed the crime. Jasper paled. He tried to run, but Caleb was quicker, grabbing his shoulder. That's enough. Reed. Red Willow is no place for lies. Applause broke out. Martha Calloway stepped out of the crowd, her voice trembling. I apologize, Miss Whitmore. I was wrong. God forgive me. Evelyn just smiled slightly. You don't need to apologize to me. Just don't forget that sometimes the truth takes time to shine through. As the crowd dispersed, Caleb took Evelyn's hand. You faced the town on your own. Evelyn, you're stronger than anyone I've ever known. She looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. I just don't want to run anymore. I'm tired. He squeezed her hand gently. Then don't. Stay. Evelyn bowed her head, tears falling. But they were tears of relief. I think, maybe, I belong here. That night, they went home together. Lydia ran out to greet Evelyn, hugging her tightly, shouting, I told you, God is always on your side. Evelyn smiled and picked her up. In Caleb's eyes, that image was like the first light of spring after the storm. Tonight, the wind had really stopped. In the small house, the sound of a guitar echoed, mingling with Lydia's laughter. Evelyn sat by the fireplace and wrote, I have been through fire, through wind, through prejudice and fear. In the end, I realized home is not where you go, but where someone dares to believe in you when the whole world turns its back. A week after the incident, Red Willow Creek returned to its peaceful rhythm. The sky was blue, new grasses were pushing through the damp soil, and sparrows were beginning to build nests on the church roof. The fierce winds had passed, leaving only the warm breath of new spring. Evelyn woke each morning with a lighter chest. No more fear, no more unanswered questions. She and Lydia went out into the garden to plant the seeds. Lydia dug holes with her small hands and dropped the white beans in. Evelyn smiled. You have to bury them deep so the wind doesn't carry them away. But if you bury them too deep, can they breathe? Yes, she replied, like humans. Sometimes we need a little darkness to grow. Caleb approached from a distance, a bucket of water in his hand. He stood looking at his two daughters, one big, one small, in the soft sunlight. He felt a peace he had never felt before. Since Evelyn had arrived, the house had never been cold. There was a fire in the hearth, laughter at the table, and every morning he had someone to greet. As Lydia ran off to chase buttons, Caleb approached Evelyn. I was thinking we should put a new fence around the garden, he said, so we can plant pumpkins next fall. Evelyn wiped her hands and looked up, smiling. You want me to carry the hammer again? No, he replied, his voice hoarse and warm. This time, I want you here, because I need a reason to put a fence around this place. She paused slightly, her eyes meeting his, clear and calm. What is that reason? To keep what is precious, he said, without hesitation. Evelyn turned away slightly, pretending to look at Lydia, but her heart was pounding. She was no longer the wounded woman seeking refuge. In Red Willow, she had found what she thought was lost, the belief that a broken heart could love again. That afternoon, they went to the church together to help Pastor Blake fix the roof. The Reverend smiled kindly as soon as he saw them. I see you three are a real family, Lydia exclaimed, because Evelyn is your mother. Evelyn laughed, and Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with something gentle and sure. She is the missing piece, he said softly. Together they climbed onto the roof, replacing each panel. The sunlight shone golden on Evelyn's hair, making Caleb unable to look away. When she turned and met his gaze, her heart fluttered. In that moment, they both knew that something more than words connected them, a quiet feeling as enduring as the land itself. Reverend Blake looked down at them and nodded slightly. He knew that some things did not need to be preached, only witnessed. That evening, they had a small meal. Lydia brought the cornbread, Caleb poured the cider, and Evelyn set out the hot beef stew. The oil lamplight illuminated their faces, warm and rosy. Miss Evelyn, Lydia said, will you stay forever? She paused, looking at Caleb. He didn't speak, just waited. Evelyn leaned down, her voice as soft as a breath. If God allow, then perhaps I won't go anywhere. Lydia clapped her hands and cheered, and Caleb smiled, his eyes shining with simple happiness. That night, after Lydia had fallen asleep, Caleb sat on the porch. The moon was high, casting silver light over the fields. Evelyn came out, wrapped in a woolen cloak, carrying 2 cups of tea. Can't sleep? She asked. No, I'm thinking about tomorrow. What's so special about tomorrow? Nothing, he said. But every day since you came has been worth living. I'm just afraid that one day you'll leave without saying goodbye. Evelyn sat down beside her. I've left many places, Caleb, but Red Willow is different. It's not fear that holds me here, but love. I don't know what to call it, but... She paused, her eyes looking away. The moonlight reflected on her face, making it look fragile and strong. Caleb said softly, It's love, Evelyn. And if you'll let me, I want to be the one to say it first. Her heart clenched. She turned to him and saw that there was no longer any hesitation in his eyes, only sincerity. "Caleb," she whispered. He continued, "I'm not making any big promises. I just want to work in the garden with you, listen to Lydia sing, and spend the rest of my days here with you." A gentle breeze blew. Evelyn smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Do you know how long it's been since I've heard such a straightforward confession of love?" "It must have been a long time," he replied, half smiling, half breathing. "Yes." She nodded, then placed her hand on his. "And perhaps. These are the words I've wanted to hear most in my life." The two looked at each other in silence. No words were needed, for everything was clear. In the sky, a full moon illuminated the vast fields. Red Willow slept, but in the little house a new beginning was slowly growing. The next morning, Lydia woke up to find Evelyn making a cake. "What are you making, a wedding cake?" Evelyn whispered, smiling at the girl's wide eyes. "To marry," who she laughed. "To marry someone who promised not to let me go." Lydia's voice rang through the kitchen, like a little bell at dawn. Caleb walked in, his hair tousled by the wind, to see the two women of his life smiling. He approached slowly, placing his hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Red Willow will see the most beautiful thing since the storm," he said. That evening, the whole town gathered in the church. Reverend Blake stood in the middle, giving the blessing. Martha Calloway brought apple pie. The children sang, and Lydia held a bouquet of wildflowers, smiling brightly. Evelyn wore a pale blue dress, simple but breathtakingly beautiful. As Caleb took her hand, he whispered, "I don't know whether to call this a blessing or a miracle, but maybe sometimes it's both." Evelyn looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I just know I found home." Everyone applauded, and the music played. Outside, the spring wind blew through the meadow, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Evelyn looked up at the sky, where the moon was as bright as the night she got lost at this station. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you for letting me get off at the wrong station, to find the right life." After the simple wedding ceremony in the little church, Red Willow seemed to be lit up with a new light. People in the town still talked about that day, about Caleb holding Evelyn's hand as children sang, about Lydia tossing wildflowers down the aisle, and about Evelyn saying "I do" with silent tears, not of sadness, but of grace. In the days that followed, their home was filled with laughter. Evelyn taught Lydia to read simple lines of the Bible, and Caleb built a new stable in the backyard. Every morning, they drank coffee together on the porch, listening to the wind blowing through the meadow. It was a peaceful time none of the three of them had ever dreamed of. One morning in May, as the dew lingered on the lavender, Evelyn noticed something changing in her heart. Not worry, but gratitude. She often looked out into the distance, where the old railway still lay, a reminder that sometimes the wrong road takes you to the right place. Caleb slowly opened up. He told her about the war years, about the nights he sat alone in the wilderness, hoping to hear someone call his name. Evelyn listened, not asking many questions, just silently touching his shoulder whenever he stopped talking. That light touch made Caleb feel like the burden on his heart was half lifted. One night, after Lydia had fallen asleep, they sat by the fireplace. The firelight reflected off the glass of the window, creating a shimmering light. Caleb whispered, "Evelyn, do you ever think you'll regret staying here?" She looked at him and smiled. "If anything, it'll be that I didn't come sooner." He was silent, then reached out and took her hand. I thought I'd never love again. But then you came like a wind blowing across the desert, turning the dust to flowers." Evelyn chuckled, her eyes sparkling. "I'm not a miracle, Caleb. I'm just someone who walked through a storm and found someone who wasn't afraid to stand in it with me." That made him hold her hand tighter. No more words were needed, just a silent understanding between two broken souls who had found each other. Summer brought long, sunny days. Lydia learned to ride, and Evelyn opened a small school for the children of the town. The classroom was simple, with long tables, a blackboard, and vases of wildflowers that Lydia picked each morning. The children of the air began to come to school, and laughter rang out throughout Red Willow. One afternoon, Martha Calloway walked into the classroom. She stood in the doorway, a basket of apples in her hand, her face a little hesitant. "I brought some apples for the children," she said, her voice softer than ever. Evelyn smiled. "Thank you, Martha. They'll love it." She put the basket down, looked around the room, and said softly, "You know, I thought you wouldn't last at Red Willow, but you stayed, taught the children, helped them read, helped them believe they could grow up to be better than us." "Maybe I was wrong," Evelyn said softly. "No one is always right, ma'am. The important thing is to get back on track when you know you've lost your way." As Martha left, a rare, gentle smile crossed her aged face. Evelyn watched, feeling strangely warm inside. Forgiveness, she thought, needed no words, just a simple act. In the evening, Caleb returned home after a long day of work. He carried a large fish and smiled. "Dinner is here," Lydia exclaimed. And Evelyn laughed. "Are you trying to make me think you're the perfect husband?" he replied, his eyes shining with gentle joy. "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to make you smile every day." They ate dinner in the breeze. After dinner, Lydia recited aloud some verses she had learned in class. "The wind carries a prayer across the fields. If we believe, all lost paths find their way home." Evelyn was silent, tears rolling down. Caleb looked at her, didn't ask anything, just gently touched her hand as if to say, "You're home, Evelyn." One day, the postman brought a letter from the East. Evelyn opened it. It was from an old friend, someone she had taught with in Philadelphia. It read, "We heard you left without leaving an address. Some say you married a rich man. Others say you disappeared. Now I know you have found a place where you belong. Evelyn, I am happy for you. I remember what you once said, a woman can travel far, but she will never be at peace until she has found a place to call home. Perhaps you were right." Evelyn folded the letter and smiled. She did not need to write a reply, for what needed to be said had been carried away by the Red Willow winds. One summer afternoon, they sat on the porch. Caleb played the guitar, Lydia sang, and Evelyn sewed a dress. The sky was clear, and butterflies fluttered around the purple flower garden. Suddenly, Lydia asked, "Miss Evelyn, if the train passed Red Willow again, would you like to get on?" She raised her head and shook her head slightly. "No, my dear, because I have found something the train could not take me to." Caleb looked up, his eyes quiet but warm. "And what is that?" Evelyn smiled. "It is where the heart rests." Lydia tilted her head, thinking, then said, "So I think Red Willow is our heart, too." Evelyn hugged her. "You're right, Lydia. This is my heart." The three of them sat there until the sun set, its light dyeing the sky crimson. Evelyn watched the scene, her heart filled with peace. In the wind, She heard whispers of the old years, loss, loneliness, longing for love. Now, all of it melted together, becoming part of a new life. She realized that some things are never really lost. They just wait to be found, at the right time, in the right place, with the right person. October brought the chill of early autumn. On the hillsides around Red Willow, the grass began to turn yellow, and deer reappeared at the edge of the woods. Each morning, mist covered the roofs, and human breath dissolved into the air like thin smoke. Evelyn wrapped herself in a woolen scarf and opened the window to let in the autumn breeze, carrying the scent of dry wood and ripe apples. Caleb was chopping wood on the porch. The sound of his axe echoed in the silence. Lydia sat on the steps, peeling apples and singing softly. Everything was slow, simple, but warm, as if time moved more slowly in Red Willow than elsewhere. Evelyn watched, a quiet happiness rising in her heart. She was no longer the lost woman she had been a year before. Now she was Caleb Turner's wife, Lydia's mother, and the beloved teacher of the town's children. But most of all, she was herself, a woman who had moved on from her past and learned to laugh at it. One afternoon, Reverend Blake stopped by. He brought a large bag of apples and an invitation to the upcoming Thanksgiving service. "Evelyn, I want you to read this year's Thanksgiving," he said, "because you are a testament to what God says sometimes blessings come in the form of trials." Evelyn paused. "Me, Reverend, I'm just an ordinary man." He smiled gently. "That's why. Because God chooses ordinary people to do extraordinary things." Caleb stood beside her, nodding. "I think he's right. You have something to tell, not to brag, but to make others believe they can do it too." Evelyn looked at the two men, feeling both grateful and fearful. "I will think about it," she replied softly. That night, after Lydia had fallen asleep, Evelyn sat down to write a thank-you note. Her pen trembled slightly on the old yellow paper. She wrote and erased and wrote again. She wrote about fear, about faith, about how one can find the light again, even when lost in the dark. She wanted to say sometimes, the wrong train doesn't lead us astray. It just helps us get to where we belong. Caleb walked in, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "Are you done writing?" "No." She smiled. "I thought I could, but when I started, I had no idea what to say." He sat down next to her, looking at the unfinished page. "Because you think you have to say something big. But really, just say it from the heart." She looked at him, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "What is it, Caleb?" "It's saying what your heart has lived through." Evelyn nodded slightly. She placed her hand on the paper and added, "I lost many things along the way, but I also found the most precious thing, the courage to love and be loved." Thanksgiving Day arrived. Red Willow smelled of pies, roast turkey, and laughter. People gathered in the churchyard, setting long tables with baskets of fruit, vases of wildflowers, candles, and slices of apple pie. Lydia, in her yellow dress and braids, ran around with the children. Caleb stood and chatted with the town men, and Evelyn arranged the tables. When Reverend Blake called for silence, Evelyn was called up. She held the paper, trembling slightly, facing all eyes. For a moment, she could hear her heart beating. But then she saw Lydia waving from afar, Caleb nodding and smiling. So she took a deep breath and began to speak. "A year ago, I was lost. I got off at the wrong station and thought God had forgotten me. But then I realized He was just leading me home. by a path I didn't expect." She paused, her voice quieter. "I used to think silence was weakness, but sometimes, in silence, we hear our own voice. And when we dare to believe, we see no mistake is really wrong. If it leads us to a place of love." The crowd fell silent. Reverend Blake bowed his head and said a soft, "Amen." Then applause broke out, first from Lydia, then from the entire hall. Martha Calloway wiped away tears, and Caleb stood against a pillar, his eyes so warm that Evelyn could not bear to look at him for long. After the ceremony, many people came up to shake Evelyn's hand, saying they recognized her story. One old man whispered, "I was lost too. Miss Whitmore, thank you for reminding me that it is possible to turn back." Evelyn smiled. "We are all just people learning how to return, sir." Night fell, and they headed home. Lydia fell asleep on the horse, her head resting on Caleb's shoulder. Evelyn walked beside him, watching the new moon hang in the sky. Everything was strangely peaceful. When they got home, Caleb tucked Lydia into bed, then joined Evelyn on the porch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of dry pine needles. "You did well today," he said. "No, Red Willow did well. Without you all, I never would have stood before that crowd." Caleb looked at her for a long time. "You know, Evelyn, I think God sent you not just so I could find happiness, but so Red Willow could learn to forgive." She looked at him, her voice soft. "You always see the good in everything, Caleb." He replied, "Because if you didn't, I wouldn't have seen you." Evelyn laughed, but tears fell. She leaned her head on his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat, slow and steady like the rhythm of a roof built to withstand the wind. In late autumn, leaves fell all over the yard. Lydia gathered them into piles and jumped up, laughing. Caleb and Evelyn watched, their arms clasped together. In the distance, the sun set behind the mountains, leaving a soft, woolen pink glow. Evelyn said softly, "Do you think this winter will be harsh?" Caleb laughed. "No, because we have each other, and this house is warm enough." She nodded. To her, Red Willow was no longer just a small town in the middle of the arid West. It was the place where she had been reborn, a place where lost souls found each other again, and where every storm ended in dawn. She held his hand tighter, whispering, "Thanks for waiting for me, Caleb." He replied softly, "No, Evelyn, I just stood there, letting you find your way back." Winter came earlier that year than usual. The red willows were covered in a soft, milky white, and snow fell gently on the roofs, the fences, and the distant fields. There were no more violent storms, only a gentle, peaceful cold, as if the earth and sky wanted to close the year with a peaceful breath. Evelyn woke to the smell of fresh bread. Lydia was up early, her red sweater bright, stirring the porridge pot on the stove with a spoon. "Miss Evelyn, I want to take porridge to the Reverend," she said. "He has a cold. Father said he was coughing all day yesterday." Evelyn smiled and stroked her hair. "You are such a good girl." "Lydia?" "Okay, I will help you." Caleb came in, his cheeks flushed from the wind. He brushed the snow off his coat and said, "There were wolf tracks in the woods last night." "I'll check the stables after dinner," Evelyn asked worriedly. "Are you going alone?" He smiled. "I'll bring my gun. Don't worry. They're just looking for food." They ate breakfast to the crackling of the firewood. The house was filled with warmth and the smell of pastries. Lydia told the story of a little girl in her class who had given her a Christmas card that read, "Thank you, Evelyn, for teaching me to believe in good things." Evelyn was moved to tears. She had never imagined that she, once lost, would become a small light for someone else. After dinner, Lydia went with Reverend Blake, and Caleb went outside. Evelyn stayed behind, cleaning up and going into the garden. The place was so quiet she could hear the snow falling. In the distance, the small river was frozen, reflecting the pale gray sky. She thought of that train, the train that had dropped her off at the wrong station, but the right one. She whispered, "Thanks for letting me get lost." As the afternoon wore on, the wind picked up, the sky darkened, and dark clouds rolled in, heralding a snowstorm. Caleb had not yet returned. Evelyn stood on the porch, a vague sense of dread rising in her. She wrapped herself in a shawl and a coat, and was about to go outside when Lydia ran up, her face pale. "Father is not home yet. The Reverend said the storm is coming fast." Auntie Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. "Stay inside. Lydia, I'll go find him." "No. Let me go with you." "No. You must stay and keep the fire going. If the snow gets too deep, that will be what keeps him from finding his way home." Evelyn rushed out, the wind whistling in her ears, the snow whipping at her face. She called out, "Caleb, Caleb." The call was carried away by the wind, lost in the white air. His footprints were still faint in the snow, leading toward the northern fields. She followed, praying as she went, "God, please don't take him from me. Not now." As she neared the woods, she saw a figure collapsed against a broken fence. Caleb was trying to pull his leg out of the iron trap. Blood stained a patch of snow. Evelyn rushed forward and knelt down. "Caleb, can you hear me?" He opened his eyes, breathing heavily. "The old trap. I can't see it in the snow. Don't talk. I'll take you home." She tried to disentangle the trap, her hands numb with cold. After a few tries, the latch sprang open. Evelyn helped him to his feet, placing his shoulder on hers, trudging through the blizzard. With each step, the snow grew deeper. She shivered, but did not stop. There was only one thought in her mind: get him home. Red Willow was waiting, finally. The house lights appeared in the white curtain. Lydia ran out, shouting. Auntie Evelyn nearly collapsed as she stepped through the doorway. She and Lydia pulled Caleb onto the bed. He was cold. His lips were blue, but his eyes were open. Evelyn took his hand. "He'll be fine. I'll boil some water. Get some medicine." Caleb smiled weakly. "You saved me again, Evelyn?" "No," she said softly. "This time, I'm just taking him home." The storm lasted all night. Inside, the fireplace burned brightly. Lydia knelt by the bed, praying. Evelyn changed his sheets and covered him with blankets, keeping him warm. Outside, the wind howled as if it would sweep the world away. But inside the house, only hope lingered. Caleb opened his eyes near dawn. The fever had subsided. He called softly, "Evelyn." She bent down, tears falling on his hand. "You scared the hell out of me." He laughed hoarsely. "I'm still here. Do you think God would send me away without keeping his promise? What promise that I would see Red Willow with you next spring?" She smiled through her tears. "Then you must be well. I want to see you teach Lydia to ride, and help me build a bigger school." He nodded slightly. "I will, for you and for the girl." A week later, the snow melted. Caleb was recovering. People from the town came to visit, bringing food, medicine, and greetings. Reverend Blake came and took Evelyn's hand. "You saved your husband's life. You see, sometimes God doesn't send an angel, but a brave woman." Evelyn smiled. I just did what I had to do." "Reverend?" He looked at her tenderly. "And that's what makes you different." When he was gone, Caleb sat up and looked out the window. "The snow is beautiful," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Yes. I've never seen it so peaceful. Because now, you're not looking at it alone." Evelyn took his hand. The midday light shone through the window, reflecting on their faces, two people who had once been lost, now finding each other in a changing world. The following spring, wildflowers bloomed all over Red Willow. The new school opened, filled with laughter. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching the children play, while Lydia ran through the yard with her friends. Caleb, mending a nearby fence, looked up and smiled at her. She smiled back, her heart filled with peace. She thought, perhaps everyone has boarded the wrong train at some point in their lives. But if we are brave enough to stay and trust, we will realize sometimes it is the wrong turns that bring us to the right place. Red Willow is no longer a railroad town. For them, it is a starting point, where a woman who seemed lost in life found love, faith, and family. That evening, as the spring breeze blew gently through the window, Evelyn wrote in her old diary, "Some mistakes are blessings. Some straying is a journey back. I used to be afraid of loneliness, but now I understand, sometimes, silence is the language of love. Because in silence, we hear most clearly the call of home in our hearts." She closed the book and looked at Caleb and Lydia sleeping soundly. Outside, Red Willow was bathed in quiet moonlight. And there, in the once desolate, wind-swept land, love had found a way to survive, as enduring as the land itself. The story of Evelyn and Caleb reminds us that there is no wrong path if we walk it with faith and kindness. Sometimes, God doesn't let us get lost. He just takes us on a little detour to find ourselves again. Silence, patience, and true love. These are the guiding lights during the loneliest years of our lives. If you ever lose your way, remember that there is always a red willow waiting for you, a peaceful place where the heart can rest. Thank you to the dear audience of Frontier Hearts, the souls who have loved, lost, and still believe in good things. If you feel this story touches your heart, please click, like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to go through these timeless love stories in the Wild West together.